Let's continue our conversation about area. Yesterday we talked about the area of a rectangle or square, and here we have a rectangle. I'm going to outline it in green. And remember, when we're finding area, we're figuring out how many square units it would take to cover the inside space of that shape. And so in this case, our units are going to be yards. And we can see that because the shape is labeled with YD or yards. And so what a square yard is it's a square, like this yellow one I've drawn, and each side of that square is 1 yard. So the length of that side is 1 yard. The length of that side would measure 1 yard. The length of that side would measure 1 yard. And the length of this side would measure 1 yard. And so that is why we would call it a square yard. If it were inches, if it was a square inch, that means that each side of that square would be equal to 1 inch. So in this case, we're using square yards. So you can see, I'm going to highlight in yellow how many square yards would cover this rectangle. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 square yards, 10, 11, 12. So there would be 12 square yards that it would take to cover this rectangle. So 12 square yards would be the area. Now, as we looked yesterday, we could also see that this side length is 1, 2, 3, 4 4 yards, and this side length is 3 yards. And so some of you are starting to see that the algorithm to find area is to take the length times the width, or 4 times 3, which would give us 12. And you can see we got 12 square yards. So that was yesterday, right? These nice, neat rectangles and squares. But what happens if we have a shape that's not a square or a rectangle? Let's say we need to find the area of this triangle. Well, we see that there are some full square units. I'm going to start outlining those in green. We can see here's 1 square unit. There's a full square unit. Here's another full square unit. 3, 4, 5, 6. Here's another full one. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So I know I have 12 full square units, right? There's 12 full squares. But we have all these kind of half or little triangles, right? Let's look at this guy right here. There's 1 little part. Here's another little part. Okay, so there's 2. I wonder if I put those 2 together. Let's see. Let me draw this one right here. If I move this one over here, would that would be 1 full square unit, wouldn't it? So that's kind of like a half unit. So now let me count how many half units I have. Okay, so I've labeled my full square units, right? I've counted those up. I saw that there are 12 of those. And now I'm going to count up my half square units. So these 2 together would now give me 13 square units. These 2 together, that would put me at 14. These 2 would put me at 15, and these 2 would put me at 16. So if I were estimating the area of this triangle, I could say it's about 16 square units. We don't know if it's inches, feet, yards, so we would just say 16 square units. Let's look at another one. I would first start by counting the full square units. So we see, okay, whoops, let me get my square. Okay, so here's 1 full unit, 2 full units, 3, 4. So I can say I have 1, 2, 3, 4. Again, these look like halves, so I'm going to count these triangles as halves. Let me get this up here. So those two together would give me 5. These two together would give me 6. This half and this half together would give me 7. This half and this half would give me 8. So estimating the area of this figure, I would say would be about 8 square units. Now those two have been pretty easy, just dealing with full squares and half squares. But what if we get to somewhere it's just like a little teeny tiny bit? Like I'm looking at this guy down here. This guy's just a little bit of a piece, right? That's not even close to a half. So how would we address that amount of space? Well, we know that a full square is going to count as 1 full unit, right? And half would give us a half a unit. But what would we do if something was covered almost all of it, but just a little bit missing, like this one right here? Most of it's covered in pink, but there's maybe a little bit missing. Well, because we're just estimating, I would mark that one as a full unit. It's almost a full unit, okay? On the other hand, what do we do if we have a square unit where just a teeny tiny bit is there? You know, it's not even close to a half, so I would really count that as 0 square units. So let's look and see how that would apply in this figure. So let's first of all look at the full squares. Okay, so these are the full squares that I've highlighted in yellow. Let's count them up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So I know there are 10 full squares. Now let's look for any that are half. Okay, these ones in red all look pretty much like a half unit to me. So these two together would then put me at 10. These two together would put me at 11. These two together would put me at 12. And this little guy would be kind of all by himself. So I can see that the number of half units would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, about 7 half units. So I'm at about 12 and a half right now. And then the next thing I'm going to want to look at are the ones that are, you know, really almost a full unit. And I can see this guy right here would probably fit in that category. So I'm going to give another hole there. So that would put me at 13 and this little half piece over here. And then I want to look to see any of them that are less than half. That's like this guy right here. So I'm going to count that one as 0. I'm not even going to count that one because it's such a little bit of a space. But these two, this guy's almost a half, and this one looks a little over half. So I might count those as 1 full one. Or maybe I'm going to combine this half and this half to give me one more whole. So that would put me at 14. And then just count this guy as 15 down here. So if I were going to estimate this area of this figure, I would say it's about 15 square units. I want to go back and double check that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, then 10, 11, 12. I'm going to count that one as a full one. 13. These two together is 14, and that one is 15. And I didn't count this one down here at all. So 15 square units. So there was one that we didn't count at all, and there were 2 that we kind of combined for a half. So that one would be, I would say, about 15 square units. Again, we're just estimating. So just to recap what you're going to do as you're estimating the area for figures that aren't exact rectangles or squares. First, you're going to want to count the number of full squares. Count those up. Then look to see how many half units you have and combine those together Remember, 2 halves make a whole. Count those up. Then look to see which ones are almost full. Maybe just a little part's missing. We're going to count those as one whole. And then last, look at the parts or the square units that have just a tiny bit covered that we're not even going to count at all. We really just would count those as 0. And this will help you to kind of organize your thinking if you do it in that order, to come up with a pretty close estimate to the actual area.